Today on the Perception and Action podcast, is creativity in sports rooted in divergent thinking, the cognitive ability to generate a lot of ideas, or in having a diverse set of motor skills? And a preview of the 2022 Baseball Skill Acquisition Summit. So it's time for a call to action. Hi, this is Rob Gray from Arizona State University. I've been on a now over 25-year journey as a researcher, professor, and high-performance consultant to understand how we acquire and adapt our perceptual motor skills. Welcome to the Perception and Action podcast, where I discuss how psychological research can be applied to improving performance, accelerating skill acquisition, and designing technologies. Before we get to today's topic, I want to tell you about a couple extra things that might interest you if you're enjoying the podcast. First, my book, How We Learn to Move, A Revolution in the Way We Coach and Practice Sports Skills, is now available in audiobook format. You can find it on Audible or Amazon. Second, if you're interested in working directly with me, I currently have openings in my monthly mentorship program. This includes monthly Zoom meetings, either one-on-one or with your staff, analysis of your practice designs, and a monthly group discussion with coaches and instructors from a range of different sports. To find out more, please go to patreon.com/perceptionaction. Now on to the show. Hi, everyone. This is Rob Gray from ASU and the Perception and Action podcast, back with another article review. In today's episode, what I want to look at is revisiting the topic of creativity in sports. I think this is both really important and it's really interesting to me because if you think about sports, a lot of what decides games is creativity, right? A player coming up with a really unique play that is both functional and unique and unexpected. And, we have these kind of great moments that we remember. So I think understanding where creativity comes from in sports and how we can develop it is a really, really important topic. So I've talked about this in the past, kind of the contrasting views of creativity. The traditional view, you can think of the icon for creativity is Rodin's The Thinker, right? Creativity is very asymmetric. It comes from the individual, their ability to think of different options, and then is expressed through movement, right? Versus the movement, the more view that's more consistent with self-organization and the ecological approach that creativity arises from exploration and interaction with your environment in a more symmetric view. And you can look at episodes 302 and 368 and some of the other ones I've done where we talk about this. Today, I want to look at this paper that was recently published in the German Journal of Exercise Sports Research, titled Creative Actions in Team Sports Are Rooted in Motor Skills Rather Than in a Divergent Thinking Ability. So for this paper, what the authors do is first, they go into more deeply about the traditional view of creativity in sports, linking it with, as people like Daniel Memmert have done, with divergent thinking, right? So divergent thinking is a cognitive ability to generate different options and multiple ideas when given a problem, right? So traditionally, if we think about a sports context, we could show an athlete a video of a play or a drawing of a play and ask them, what would you do here, right? So a really skilled player might say, I could do a back pass, I could do a spin, I could drive, I could pass to this, right? So they're generating a bunch of ideas, right? And they're doing this in bringing lots of different options. That's what we mean by divergent thinking, the ability to generate a bunch of different options cognitively. It's typically asked to, they're given open-ended. Like I said, what would you do in this situation? And we're looking for three components: fluency, how many different ideas can you generate? Flexibility, how varied are the ideas? And originality, how unique are they compared to what other people generate? Right, so this is typically how creativity was studied. This has some important implications, right? As I said, it implies that creativity is asymmetric, right? Creativity comes from the individual and is expressed in the environment through movement, right? Not the movement doesn't play a role in coming up with a creative solution. It's used to express it, right? In a very one-sided way. It occurs in this view of divergent thinking is a very linear, sequential things, right? I perceive, I think, I decide, I act, right? Step after step. So the creativity happens at this thinking and deciding stage and is expressed in the movement later on. The other thing is, in divergent thinking is largely like a lot of this general skills we talk about is thought to be context independent, right? The ability to generate options really doesn't depend specifically on what environment we're talking about. Right. It's something that could be trained out of context, uncoupled, and so on. And then this is a figure from my book, right? The idea that movement is just an expression of all this other stuff going on rather than being involved in it in any way, right? So that's a traditional, very asymmetric approach. And then divergent thinking is something that's going to be used and measured in the study. The alternative view, obviously, is that in the ecological approach, that creative actions emerge from controlling the movement, right? So they're adaptive rather than being an idea that expressed through movement. The coupling of perception and action results in creative behaviors. Solving a problem results in a creative action. The authors in this paper, when they're talking about the alternative view, they don't use the word ecological approach or anything ecological dynamics. So, but their alternative view is something that I'm going to disagree with, right? Their alternative view is that instead of thinking of creativity as coming from cognition and generating lots of ideas, they're going to argue the alternative is that creativity comes from having a large repertoire of skills, right? So they're going to argue that the sport they're going to study is soccer. A creative soccer player is not one that can think a lot. It's one that's able to execute a back pass, a spin, crossover dribble, all these things. So creativity is going to come from having a large repertoire of these skills that you can pull upon, right? So it's almost asymmetric in the opposite direction, right? Instead of having lots of cognitions and thoughts and plans, it's having lots of movement skills. And as I said, I don't really love this conception of it, but we'll get to that. So what they're going to do in their study is they're going to take a group of soccer players and they're going to train them in one that's designed for divergent thinking or one that's specifically focusing on developing their motor skill repertoire. They'll call it the functional skills group, FS, and divergent thinking group. Before and after, they're going to have basically a kind of a small sided game set up where you have to get by defenders, and they're going to measure creativity by using expert evaluation. So experts are going to evaluate how creative the solution they came out with. Obviously, expert ratings have their problems, right? They're somewhat circular, but there's not much else you can do, and it's hard to assess creativity in any other way right now. What they argue, because they kind of believe in the alternative view, that larger improvements when they do the tests of the small-sided game is going to be shown in the functional skills group as compared to the divergent thinking group. Okay. So how did they do this? So they took 24 male youth players, elite youth. Mark Sullivan would be spinning over here. Elite youth players that were from Switzerland. They randomly assigned them either to the divergent thinking training or the functional skills training. There's 4 weeks of training and testing with the sessions integrated into practice, the regular practice. And interestingly, I thought this was an interesting thing, and maybe something we should think about in other studies. The instructors that were delivering the training alternated between the groups, right? So there wasn't like a bias. So you can't explain the results that the person that happened to deliver the divergent thinking training is just a better coach because they also did the other training at some point, right? So I thought that was an interesting way to do things. I think good idea. What did they do? Okay, first of all, in the divergent thinking training, so what they did, as I said, they assessed before and after. They did that small-sided games test. They also assessed divergent thinking by having people watch videos and come up open-ended another thing. So they're shown 20 video clips. They're occluded and they're asked to imagine and list all the options they could do, right? And they were rated on their creativity. So there's 2 tests pre and post. The functional skill one, we're actually playing in a small-sided game, and this divergent thinking test is done both. Okay. The functional and creativity, the actual test of on-field creativity, this was the setup. It was a 2-on-1 kind of scenario. The goal was to get by these defenders. And as I said, expert ratings were made of the functionality and creativity of the movements. So they have two kind of things. So good measures, good like measuring both on the field and kind of the underlying process, right? So that's kind of the pre and post test. Now let's look at the actual training. This is where this paper really surprised me, right? I was expecting the divergent thinking training. So that should say divergent thinking. It's not differential learning. I've done too many of those lately. But DT, I was expecting the divergent thinking would be kind of off the field thing where we're watching videos or something and helping players to learn how to come up with other options. It was actually, and it's really actually hard to figure out exactly what they did in this scenario. But what they had, so this is the words from their paper. Training sessions for the Divergent Thinking group comprise of playful and pronouncedly variable game forms, stimulating players to come up with a variety of new solutions ideas across a wide range of situations. To me, that sounds like using small-sided games, constraints-led approach, trying to promote affordances. I don't know how this is promoting specifically divergent thinking, right? I don't think any ecological psychologist would have any approach person would have any problem with that kind of training. It sounds great to me. They also aim to increase the breadth of attention by creating practice environments that provide a wider focus. So they kind of illustrate this. I'll go back in a second. So in the top one here, they're creating scenarios. I don't know if they were pointing it out verbally, right? This top two graphs are getting to learn to identify spaces, open spaces, getting them like free play. As I said, again, I don't know how this you can call this divergent thinking training, right? This is the constraints-led approach. This is small-sided games amplifying affordances, right? Constraining to afford. I don't know how this is divergent thinking, but that's what they called it. So that was one group. Call it the divergent thinking group. The other group did the functional skills training, was more focused on giving a specific, okay, in this activity, I want you to destabilize the opponent. In this activity, I want you to drive by the opponent. So they were focusing on not uncoupled technique, like keeping the ball up in the air or spinning, kicking. They were coupled, but they were focusing on specific skills. Right. So, for example, they had a face-to-face where you had to try to get around this person, receiving, turning and receiving and after return. So it was good, coupled practice, focusing on those specific movement solutions, right? Not exactly how to do them, but specific movement solutions. Okay. So those are the two training groups. Again, hard to say that they're actually getting at what the authors are describing, but that they are what they are. Okay. Excuse me. Results. So first, looking at the divergent thinking score. So remember, this is when they watched a video that was where it was occluded and they're passively generating options, right? The divergent thinking, so pre-test, they're about the same. Divergent thinking after training could generate more options verbally. Okay. You would expect this, right? If the actual training was focused on this, but I don't know. So, but that's what they found. The other one, the on-field performance. So here's the on-field performance results. So the terms of functionality and creativity. The on-field performance results of this study are really, really hard to determine because they have massive pre-test differences. So the players in the divergent thinking group had a way higher score in both functionality and creativity of movements in the small-sided game before any training was done than the other group, right? So there was a pre-test difference by how players were randomly assigned, right? This creates a massive problem for when you have a study, any kind of training study. And if you get this, what I would recommend doing is giving the test first. Giving some sort of skills test first, and then randomly assigning to the training groups based on that test, right? Because that can ensure you get all different levels and you don't get a really big imbalance. Well, anyways, what they find was the functional skills group increased in functionality and creativity, while the divergent thinking group decreased, right? Which again, I don't know why you'd expect them to decrease after doing that kind of training. But anyway, even though you made them worse somehow. So I'm not sure what's going on with this, but the authors argue that what it's showing is the functional skills training is giving you more, is improving creativity more. There was actually, even if you accept all this and don't worry about the pretest differences, there was nothing statistically significant anyway. So I don't know what you can make of this. So anyways, my thoughts. So obviously, as I expressed before, this is a very odd way to contrast these two theories. Differential, again, I put divergent thinking versus the alternative view. Both of those training methods seem to be consistent with the alternative view. They're both fit under the ecological approach to me. So I don't know how we're testing that. I don't think the data supports the conclusions at all, right? They may have a really strong title, creativity is based in motor skills. I don't know how you can say that from the results. And I worry about their conceptualization of the alternative that, so the alternative is the idea that if you have these bunch of skills, like you could develop, uncoupled technical skills is what leads to creativity, right? Even though in the training, they didn't really do that. So I'm not sure if that's exactly what they're proposing, but I just want to kind of shoot that down, right? That's not what we mean by the alternative approach to creativity, right? Creativity comes from exposure to a lot of movement problems you have to solve, right? That's where you're going to get creativity. Giving athletes lots of problems to solve is where that's going to come from. Okay. Hi, everyone. Today I'm joined by my partners in crime from the Baseball Skill Acquisition Summit. We're going to kind of preview what's going to happen this year. We're back in person. They were back in person last year. I was virtual, but I'm happy to be going in person again this year. Preview what's going on, and maybe we'll just kind of talk about some general issues about skill acquisition. We'll see what happens. So I'm going to throw it to Randy Sullivan first to kind of set the stage for what's happening and when and how to find information and things like that.
Yeah, well, great. This is our fourth annual. We had to take a reprieve during COVID the 1 year, but this is our fourth annual Baseball Skill Acquisition Summit. It has been attended by over 400 coaches, a lot of them from major league organizations over the past few years, and it seems to be a new group every time. It's not the same people coming, so that's good. More and more people are getting access to this vital information. Of course, our keynote speaker is Franz Bosch, and he's sort of the leader of the gang here, and he kind of guides us all along through this skill acquisition process and using leading edge motor learning science to help in baseball player development. We're going to be doing it this year in Lakeland again at the Hilton Garden Inn, just like we did before, on October 22nd and 23rd. It will start at 8 a.m. for registration on Saturday, and we'll do the practicals at our at the Florida Baseball Armory here. Hopefully, if all things go well, in our new place, if construction continues to progress, we'll do the practicals on Sunday. And we'll do that between 9 a.m. and 2 p.m. And it'll be really a nice little journey to take you from theory all the way down to practical application. As the day progresses, we get closer and closer to practical application, to where on the second day you leave with a whole toolbox full of ideas, things that you can use to help enhance your player development in pitching and hitting and in fielding and base running, and also just in integrating strength and coordination with all that and how it all works. So we're real excited about it, and we're excited to have this whole team back together again, man. This think tank of ideas that come out of this group is really phenomenal. And I think it's been a revolution in baseball training. If they want to sign up, we'll hit this at the end also, but FloridaBaseballArmory.com/summit.
Cool. So October 22nd, 23rd. So I'll throw a couple extra things in there. One of my favorite parts is there's lots of time to chat with people, in the bar on the first night, and during the practicals, everyone's just milling about, and you can just pull people aside and talk to people. My joke I make is always, after the first night, my neck is always sore from looking up at pitching coaches who are always really tall because they're former pitchers. And so I always leave with a sore neck. But it's super, super fun. So I enjoy that. The other thing is I think, I'll be self-aggrandizing here. I think we do a pretty good job of saying the same things and new things at the same time, right? So if you've been here before, there is new stuff. We don't just do the same presentations every year, right? But we cover the same principles, I think, pretty well, like self-organization, attractors, and so on. So that's one of the things I like about it. I learn new stuff every year from these guys, and that builds on it. So I think both if you're new, we'll have enough introductory stuff that you won't be blown out of the water. And if you've been here before, I think you'll enjoy it, at least from what I've seen, for sure. Yeah. So maybe I'll kick it to Franz first. I mean, tell what you have a very intriguing title, Franz, about what you're going to talk about this year. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, actually, I forgot the title. What's the title again?
I forgot it too. I would say.
But I really like your theme was it's how to build skill. But you were talking about how in the slides that you shared with me was can you use data to guide movement, or looking forward, or can we only use it when we're looking backwards? So does it help movement, right?
That's something I'm So go ahead.
My presentation basically will be about the knock-on effect that you have if you are very adamant about a certain cue, right? I'll talk about separation. If you demand separation of a player, then that can have a knock-on effect that causes errors everywhere else in the whole system. If you want to push off with your back leg more as a pitcher, because your coach tells you to do that, that can have an enormous knock-on effect to all different other parts of the system. And what I try to show is that the quote, "There's so little bio in biomechanics," that is really true. Right, we have to get the bio part back in biomechanics, and with that being said, I'll go further and further into the swamp of that the body has its own ways of coping with things and will misinterpret cues from coaches by having a knock-on effect where errors will occur somewhere else, and also in kind of a backward chaining prediction that the body has. Oh, I think this is going to happen, and I opt out in this direction. And then obviously where we end up is okay, what's the better approach? The better approach is to use self-organization, right? To make use of how the body is structured and how it wants to structure, right? What the interest of the body is in order to deal with things. What we have to get rid of is a kind of alchemist approach to skill, right? Like I'll beat you into submission, and I'll beat you to become gold, right? We have to work with how the body self-organizes, and that's less or more kickoff that I give in my presentations. I'll be talking a little bit about baseball. I'm not a real baseball guy, but then the other ones will let's say specify that in pitching, batting, and other aspects of the sport. And basically what I also want to do, or what we will do, is that we want to bridge that gap between theory and practical much better than you actually can read in books, right? Yeah. That's basically what my interest is shifting a little bit. I've been studying all the theories forever, and I kind of get fed up with it. I'm more interested in what does this now really mean in what you do in practice. So that will be, I think, quite a big theme in the whole summit.
Yeah, Franz, I think if I'm interpreting you right, I think biomechanics and data, understanding of biomechanics and data is mostly used in like a corrective way now, right? You have an athlete that doesn't perform well, and you try to correct something that's already been built, right? Yeah. Instead of let's get that stuff in the start and use it for practice design and build the skill, in a more logical way. Yeah, is that kind of what you mean by the kind of going the other direction? Yeah.
A friend of mine who is a bit skeptical about all these data says actually data only have the function of acknowledging what you already know, right? It's not a steering wheel that you can use to direct the whole skill acquisition, because you never get all the data, right? And if you leave out some data, then probably you'll go in the wrong direction. So as an example, I once was giving a presentation on high jump together with a friend of mine. We were Camp A, and then Camp B was a biomechanist and another coach who had a complete different opinion. And then we would have presentations, and a big clash. Right? So I gave my presentation, and then the biomechanist gave his presentation, and he said exactly the same thing that I did. And so afterwards I went to him and I said, listen, what happened? Well, he says if we measure one jump, he was German, so that's why we measure 500 different parameters. Right? And then you take the 25 most important ones, and that's where you draw your conclusions. But for today, I took 25 others. That's why it cannot be data driven. Right? Mm-hmm. It has to be a different way in which you approach it.
Yeah, for sure.
I think, Rob, I think the inferential leap that we make is that kind of stymies us in player development is we look at the data, like motion capture sensors, for example. They're giving us information about the sensors, but we make the inferential leap that's telling us what the body's doing. And what the body's actually doing with motor control and coordination and synergy and synchronization, we really can't measure. And so we think that if we can get enough of a sample size, we'll dilute out all the variability. And Turby has a really good paper on that about how when you start with a flawed assumption and you make the sample size larger, you actually just amplify the flawed assumption each time you repeat it. And so this idea that we're going to get this big sample size and come up with norms and ranges using data, it's making that inferential leap that the sensors equal what's happening in the body.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And even more so, I think that's the biggest point. Right? If you take an average of a big group of people, you never can draw conclusions about an individual.
Right.
That's completely impossible.
Yeah.
Right.
And it gets very you need to understand how it fits into the whole movement, not just like endpoint or measurement or there's lots of it has value, but you can't just use it blindly. It has to be guided in so many. Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, no, I think that's a really important point. In baseball specific, everybody, if we're going to have biomechanical data from games soon, like with the sensors and Kinetrax that everybody's getting now, all the teams, going to be a lot of data out there. So how to use it is, I think, the $1 million question, literally. So, Bart, let's hear, a little bit about what you're going to talk about.
I'm going to dive into the hitting part again. And I think the cool thing this year is that I'm going to try to approach it from more of an anatomical perspective. So what Franz was talking about, looking at the knock-on effect and what are the constraints of the anatomy in hitting. And then you discover that everybody's anatomy is different. So there are no golden rules for a specific technique. And that brings to the forefront that you have to use self-organization and practice again. And hopefully we can show that more in the practical sessions on Sunday. But I want to zoom in a little bit on the lower half of hitting. I'm going to go over more parts, but how important it is to control the pelvis and what, if you don't control the pelvis in the right way, what kind of knock-on effects that has up the chain. And hopefully I can show that through some slides through anatomy and what are the demands of certain parts of the body to make sure that the pelvis is controlled in the right way. That's going to be my biggest focus during the presentation. And hopefully with everybody else, what we try to do during the presentations is tie it all together. And I think the powerful thing about this summit is that on a spectrum, we have a very theoretical approach, but we walk the spectrum all the way to practical application. And I think that's something that a lot of times we miss. We either look at academia, we go into literature, and they miss the context of practical application, or you go into practical application, but there's no real sense of those theoretical concepts. And I think in the last couple of years, we've been really, really good at bridging that gap. So what we know from theory now, how does that apply to baseball specific in this summit? And I'm really looking forward to everybody else's presentations. Toyin and Randy, they can talk about what they're going to present on, but tying it all together, I think is what the strength is of this summit. So really, really happy to be part of it again.
Yeah. I'd agree, Bart. I think that's a great point. I think, although I'm at one end, kind of the theory research, although I think all of us do, but of both, I think. And then you guys like coaches that are really doing it. I just have to talk about it. I do a bit of consulting. So I think we all have both feet, just a little more one than the other of application and theory and science. So I think it all fits well together too. I agree. That's a real strength. Yeah.
And with that too, I think we're all more in the camp of implementing ecological dynamics to our training approach. And if you look at the theoretical side of ecological dynamics, it can be pretty difficult and intimidating to go into that because of the terms and the jargon. And I think we can really show how we use those concepts and apply it to training. We'll show how you can use constraint-led approach or differential learning. And I think bridging that gap is really important because there's so much to get from the camp of ecological dynamics. But a lot of times what I see in professional sports is that bridge, it takes a long time before people can actually understand the concepts and then translate it into practical application. So I think this is, if you want to know more about that, then this is the place to go to. So
yeah, for sure. I think it's probably the only one. I know lots of people and teams are starting to get it, but for coming together and talking about this specific topic, this is the ultimate source for sure. Ecological dynamics in baseball. I don't think there's a better place you could go if you're interested in that. Toyn.
I
Sorry, Franz.
I discussed it with Martijn, who's not here now. He will talk a lot about all kinds of, let's say, strategies for effective practical application of motor learning. And we talked a lot today about constraint-led approach and how you would, let's say, filter out what constraint to use when. I think that's the step we need be able to make. When do you choose an environmental constraint? When do you use a task constraint to manipulate what you're doing? And he will dive into that and try to give you as many tools as possible to actually work with a constraint-led approach. So leave the word salad out and say, okay, if you do this, then this is the consequence of what you do. So you better choose those kind of constraints if you want to improve such and such components of the skill.
Yeah. And then on the second day, we'll actually see them on the field. You can try some of them if you want, some of the constraints and different things. So yeah, that's great. Toyn, can you tell us a little bit about what you're going to talk about?
Yes, I'm going to zoom in on the strength training. And the starting point for me is that within the sports skill training, you cannot improve all concepts or aspects of a certain skill because you're too busy with, for instance, decision making or other aspects of the skill. So the starting point is that if you want to improve aspects of a skill, you have to take it out of the context, and then you can improve it. For instance, in the strength training, and the idea is that you start off with the total movement pattern, and if you cannot improve it within the total movement pattern, you have to be able to navigate through certain building blocks of a skill. So you have the total movement pattern. If you can't improve it there, you have to go to like cooperating muscle chains. We call it global attractors. If you can't improve it there, you have to go a step smaller. You go to local attractors. And if you're not capable of improving it there, you have to go to individual muscle. But you have to be able to navigate within those levels of the building block approach. And that's what I'm going to show, like for start acceleration or for hitting all kinds of aspects of skills from baseball movements.
Mm-hmm. Good. Yeah, I think that will fit well with what I'm thinking of talking about. So that's great. I think we're covering all the different angles. Randy, what are you gonna? Something to do with pitching, I'm guessing. You're gonna be the pitching representative.
So basically, we're gonna talk a little bit about some flawed assumptions, some things that we think are stymieing. I think that the idea that the inferential leap from data to actually what's happening is a big holding us back in player development. And I also think the idea that the current model of looking at elites and breaking down the infinite details of what they do and then getting amateurs or potential elites to model those people, I think is a flawed approach, because I think we may be looking at survivorship bias. And instead, what we have to do is turn to the anatomy and these universal movement principles that Franz identified brilliantly in his book, Anatomy of Agility. And we took those concepts and applied them to pitching and had some really successful results. And then the big revelation for us has been that we always looked at looking at movement through like video and using data and things like that. And we were looking at things like angles and joint positions. And it occurred to us that really the theme of this presentation for us and what our training has been lately is that it's all about conditions. Are the muscles on, not the position. So conditions, not positions, is really the theme of our presentation. Is it active? Is it being turned on in synchronization and synergy? Are we having these little co-contractions handing off to one another? We're going to dig deep into that and show how you can you can't really measure it, but the athlete can certainly feel it, and you can kind of create an environment that elicits it and then hope that it transfers. But we really can never measure it. And then Alan's going to tag team with me.
Yeah.
And Alan's our strength and conditioning coordinator here, our director of performance. And he's going to talk about how we cannot do this in a silo. We have to use the gym. We have to use strength and conditioning to integrate.
To integrate Savage training. And I'm really going to touch a lot about rotation around the hip hinge, closing the front door, and then just rotation in general. I'll do mostly on Sunday with the how to apply everything, but touching a little bit on Saturday as well.
Yeah. Well, that sounds great. Yeah, I see a kind of emerging theme I see is the connection between the data, the strength, the weight room, and the field. How do we use those so they work together, not just complete silos like we typically do. That sounds really good. So I'm going to talk about this kind of concept that's I think about sometimes, and I think fits with some of the things you guys are saying. The difference between an action capacity and a skill, and how we train each of those. I'd like to, you guys want to throw in your comments. Two of the comments that I commonly get when people see the stuff we do isn't when you train people to attractors like hip hinge, co-contraction, how is that any different than training an ideal technique? Right? Doesn't that sound like the same thing? And the other thing people's comment is, we complain about that hitting off tees is not a good way to train a batter, but then we have them moving around with an aqua bag where there's no ball, right? How's that not uncoupled, right? And I think the answer to those is one of them, sometimes we're training an action capacity or a condition like Randy, and sometimes we're training a skill. And skill, I think that we have to and where we get in trouble is we mix up the two, like agility. Training agility by running around cones. Agility is an information-driven skill. It's not a capacity you can load up and then put out, right? So that's what I want to try to think aloud a lot of it and try to clarify. So I think that's a lot of the same kind of stuff, how we link the weight room with the field. What is the purpose of this exercise? Like in baseball terms, bat speed is a multifunctional skill, right? It depends on gaze behavior, decision making. Rotational velocity is a capacity that adds into that, right? You have better rotational velocity, you can wait longer, you can pick up more information. So the idea, action capacity gives you more opportunities when you perform a skill. You got to make those two work together. So that's what I'm thinking. I haven't finished my slides yet, so I'm still thinking, but that's where I'm going. So I see that we never plan these things beforehand, and they always seem to connect in some way. So that I think that's one of the strengths. So of these, any comments about the kind of the second day, Randy, in terms of the activities, or does anyone else want to?
Well, hopefully we're going to be in our brand new facility if construction continues. Otherwise, we'll be right back here where we were last year at the Armory as it is now. And it'll be really neat because we're going to take all the different disciplines. We're going to do, like Franz will do a presentation about an overarching concept, like deceleration or something like that, or transfer of energy through the torso or some other topic. And then we're going to apply it to pitching. And then we'll show how we apply that and integrate the pitching component with the strength training. And then we're going to show how you apply that concept to hitting and how you apply it to fielding and base running and how we integrate all that together. And it's going to really make for a nice show you how you can take these overarching concepts and then make them unique to the thing that you're trying to develop.
Cool. Yeah, no, it's always a lot of fun. I like seeing these things in action and what you guys do. Any other comments anyone have about, what we're, this, as you say, you said this is the fourth one, Randy?
Fourth one.
Yeah.
Fourth annual with one break. Yeah.
And I always find it's a good size. There's also usually vendors, right, Randy? Some
Yes,
people.
right. We'll have Kyle from Newt Force will be there as well, showing off the Newt
Oh,
Force
cool.
mount. Really neat technology that he's upgraded,
Mhm.
and it's in pro and college programs around the country now. Really neat tool that allows you to just see the ground reaction force you're creating in real time with video connected.
Mhm.
And we've done a lot of research using the one that we have and determine what are what are the most important contributors to velocity and command, secondary stuff, things like that. So that'll be neat. And like you alluded to this earlier, but I think the best part of the Skill Acquisition Summit is it happens during the breaks, it happens during lunch, it happens at the bar on Saturday night, and with all the little intermingling and exchanging of ideas that occur just from the general questions that you get, and just intermingling with other people throughout and learning from them as well. So it's a big collaboration.
Yeah, and making connections that go beyond after the meeting's over. I find that really, there's a lot of smart people. Yeah.
Rob, I think also one thing to highlight, and we said it the years before, but maybe this year it's even stronger than ever. It's not just baseball coaches. You don't have to be a uniformed coach to get a lot of information out of this summit. Toon and Franz are going to present more on like coordination, strength and conditioning. Now we're talking about data, so data analysts can come and be open-minded about a different look how to implement data. We're talking about how data can influence training. As an anecdote, I was talking to a biomechanics as well, and he through research, he said, well, if a hitter extends his front leg, you can get more bat speed because he had a big data set, and on average, people that extended their front leg created more bat speed. And I said, that's great, but what if the ball is not there? It's like, are we going to allow everybody to extend their front leg? What if he has to react to off-speed pitches now? So the ecological approach, how do you implement that when you look at data? I think all these things come to the surface, and you don't have to be just a baseball coach to get a lot of information out of the summit. So strength and conditioning coaches, physiotherapists, all can get a lot out of this. And I think that's the beauty and the strength of what we're trying to accomplish. So
yeah, I think
I would like to emphasize that because both Teun and myself, we don't have a baseball background. Teun has a vast experience with the National Olympic Committee in the Netherlands, play with volleyball and all kinds of other sports. I have my experience outside of baseball quite a bit. And even Bart, he's going to present these concepts in a smaller setting for the Major Soccer League in the US. So this cross-pollination is, I think that's absolutely one of the best ways to learn and understand these concepts.
Yeah. No, I think I agree. And anyone in player development, I think this is a principled approach to player development. And then, across other sports, I think you can learn a lot from other sports. Go in the other direction. I encourage baseball people to go to golf conferences or something, for example, too. You can learn a lot. Yeah.
We've been able to take these concepts and evaluate and help PGA golfers and beach volleyball players and NFL quarterbacks. And the concepts apply to it's almost better evaluating a skill that you don't know anything about because you don't have all the biases that you bring with you, all the things you've been taught your whole life. You can just look at these overarching principles and go, do we meet them? And you know where another fertile ground is that I often forget about is in rehabilitation. Ecological dynamics and rehabilitation is a fertile market that's not being used very much. And I think there's a lot of value in using these concepts of self-organization in rehab as well. And I think if you're a person who rehabs athletes, or even just a physical therapist or athletic trainer in general, also a good source of information for you to learn how to sort of better coordinate your rehabilitation.
Yeah, 100%, Randy. I think there's some people starting to think in that direction, but you're right, moving away from here, do these 10 exercises over and over, right, and to recover.
I knew this when I was actually had a physical therapy practice in our clinic open. I wish I knew it when I was learning physical therapy. I wish we'd learn these things in PT school, but it's really valuable to help guys who are in pain get better too. So
yeah. Yeah, I have a personal story. I have a family member that was in a motorcycle accident, and he's going through physiotherapy, and he's really struggling with it mentally because he gets so frustrated. All the exercises are showing him is what he can't do, anymore. Right. And that's what we do with a lot of rehab. It's very demotivating. And there's so much better way we could be doing it, I think, if we follow the dynamics approach. And yeah, the other sport, I think you told me, Randy, you do your best to move in analysis in sports you don't really understand. Right. Right. You don't have any preconceived of whether you have to have separation or whatever, right?
Well, expert by it. Exactly.
Yeah. So I think that's a really good.
It's not shouldn't be going that way, or
Yeah.
should, you know.
Yeah. No. So it's a lot of fun. It's probably my favorite time for a meeting. You know, right in my wheelhouse. So I can't really. Not surprising, but it's a lot of fun. Yeah. Anyone else have any last comments? Or Randy, do you want to kind of give us the info again?
It's at the Florida Baseball Army. It's the Baseball Skill Acquisition Summit 4. We're really excited about it. It's going to be October 22nd and 23rd. And you can register at floridabaseballarmy.com/summit.
Yeah.
And hurry, because we only have so much capacity in the room. So if it sells out, we got to start turning people away. So
yeah,
be here as quick as you can.
And I'll plug, the Florida Baseball Army has a super helpful person, Amy Marsh, who will help. Call if you have any question about anything, arriving late, whatever you have to sort out. She will. Yeah.
Our number is 866-STRIKE-3. 866-777-533. Yeah.
Right. We'll have a battle between pitching and hitting out through this meeting too. I don't like your phone number. No. Okay. Okay. All right, guys. Thanks for joining me. And I'll look forward to seeing you guys all in person, and hopefully a lot of people listening too. Okay, that's it for today's episode. Remember, you can contact me at robgray@asu.edu or follow me on Twitter at ShakyWeights. To find out more about the podcast, please check out perceptionaction.com. Finally, to support the podcast and receive bonus materials and find out about my one-on-one mentoring, please head over to patreon.com/perceptionaction. This is Rob Gray from ASU. Cheers for now, and keep them coupled.